In today's scripture passage, Jesus is praying, and his disciples have a front row seat. So when he finishes, they say, "Teach us how to pray." There are so many things that Jesus could have said in that moment. I would love to hear Jesus describe why he prays, or what he believes praying does, the purpose of prayer, or how he feels when he prays. But instead of beginning an extended discourse, Jesus offers something very practical. A few sentences that his disciples can use in their conversations with God. These few sentences that Jesus gives the disciples have been translated and interpreted in many ways. They have been dissected and discussed in uncountable sermons and lectures and books. So much has come of that one short teaching. The simple prayer that Jesus offers continues to be a resource for all of us who are still learning how to pray. Perhaps some of the folks in this room have a favorite version of what we usually call the Lord's Prayer, or a favorite line. Or maybe you can remember one of those sermons or enrichment experiences in your own life that opened up the words for you and made them more meaningful. I'm not going to give one of those sermons today. One of the things we often don't stop to consider with the same seriousness is the story that Jesus tells after he gives the disciples these words of the Lord's Prayer. It's quite a strange story. Jesus asks us to imagine that we have gone to trouble a friend in the middle of the night. "Lend me 3 loaves of bread," we demand. For someone has come to visit, and I don't have anything to feed them. In this story, the friend we wake up is understandably irritated. "Do not bother me," they say. "Everyone is already in bed. I can't get you anything." I can understand wanting to stay in bed. I've already turned out all the lights and locked the door. I can also understand not wanting to wake up a child who you've finally gotten to sleep. And I wonder if it has occurred to this sleepy person that bread is not really something that can be loaned out. It can be given and eaten and then perhaps replaced eventually, but not immediately. So the rudely awakened person may not have something else with which to feed those currently sleeping children the next day if they offer this gesture of hospitality in the middle of the night. No wonder they say no. But Jesus gives even stranger advice after this, saying, "Keep bothering your friend." Be persistent until that person gives you what you need, what you're asking for. Because it turns out in the logic of this particular story, our friend is God. And if we are persistent in bothering God, Jesus says, God will give us what we need. Ask, Jesus says, and it will be given to you. Search, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened for you. I have trouble with this passage. Because God knows people don't always get what we need. Folks go hungry every day. They are harmed by lack of water or freedom or safety or education. They are hurt and overcome in so many different ways. We cannot tell a person in such a situation that they simply need to ask or search or find or knock. God has compassion for that person, of course, but human systems have not had compassion. But I think context matters here. Jesus has not been discussing poverty or war, but prayer. And there's something to this idea that in our prayer life, Jesus encourages us to approach God like someone banging on a friend's door at midnight, begging for bread. We have to show up, asking, searching, finding, knocking, until the door of perhaps our own heart swings open and we can receive the spiritual gifts that God has to offer. Or we could explore the metaphor in a different way. Consider, in the ancient world, if you wanted bread and you didn't want to beg your neighbor for it, you couldn't simply go to the store necessarily. You needed to be persistent and plan. If you wanted bread, it started with someone in your community sowing some seeds, right? Sowing them and tending them until they matured. And then someone would need to harvest the wheat that grew up. And then someone would need to thresh that wheat. Sowing and tending and harvesting and threshing, these are all enormous, time-consuming, physical forms of labor. And you're still not done at that point. All you have now are hard, dry grains that are not yet truly edible. Next, the grains must be ground or milled into flour, also potentially quite a workout for someone. And then finally, this next part may be familiar to more of us. Bread requires the mixing of flour and water and usually salt and usually yeast or starter. And at first, when you begin to mix them together, the ingredients resist one another. They form a sort of uneven, gloppy, sticky mess. So what do we do next? You knead it, right? We knead it, covering our counter and ourselves with flour to develop the gluten until that mess that we started with becomes a dough that is strong and smooth. I have the privilege of talking with folks about prayer more often than most people usually do, I'm guessing. And many people assume that there is a right way to do it. Just like Jesus' disciples, we are looking for the experts who will tell us, how can we do this correctly? Surely, if we could only learn the right technique or the proper words, we will have a fulfilling prayer life, a magnificent connection with God with no sweat at all. But it turns out that the words we use for prayer, the recipe of the prayer, that is often the easiest part of it. The hard part is showing up to do it and putting our whole heart into that labor. Like any relationship, a relationship with God requires persistence and effort. We've got to keep showing up day after day, season after season. We've got to keep doing the work of offering our hearts, even when we may not be in the mood or the results are uncertain. Anyone can talk with God in any way that they want. We don't need to worry about etiquette. When we're angry, it's okay to show it. If we're unsure, it's fine to be a little bit awkward. Even if we're rude, God can take it. We can use the words of the Lord's Prayer. And if you were missing that sermon that I could have given, come to our enrichment session after church. where Joyce will be exploring different versions of that prayer more deeply. Or you could use other words, or none at all. There are some more ideas about how to begin or how to refresh your prayer life out in the hallway. But the most important thing to remember about prayer is that it rewards practice and persistence. Keep banging on the door until you feel it open. Keep working the dough until it springs back in your hand. Knock and knead and see what delicious and satisfying gifts may come from it. May you find many wonderful ways to pray, and may they bless you.